Gleich kommt das Falterradio. Vorher gibt es noch Werbung. Sie hilft, unsere journalistische Arbeit zu finanzieren.
Der Preis für ein gutes Buch sollte nicht das gute Gewissen sein. Faltershop.at, der Online-Shop mit Prinzipien. Über 1,5 Millionen Bücher, DVDs und CDs mit gutem Gewissen bestellen.
Falterradio, der Podcast mit Raimund Löw.
Sehr herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, zum Falterradio. Anfang März wählt Israel ein neues Parlament. Zum 3. Mal innerhalb eines Jahres findet in dem jüdischen Staat ein Urnengang zur Knesset statt. Benjamin Netanyahu kämpft als Chef einer rechtsrechten Regierungskoalition um sein politisches Überleben. Im Wahlkampf stehen Korruptionsvorwürfe gegen den Langzeitpremier im Zentrum. Gideon Levy ist der prominenteste regierungskritische Journalist Israels. Seit den 1980er Jahren schreibt Levy für die israelische Tageszeitung Haaretz. Die wichtigste Frage für die Zukunft Israels kommt in dem Wahlkampf so gut wie gar nicht vor, sagt Levy, das drakonische Besatzungsregime in den Palästinensergebieten. Mit seiner unabhängigen Presse und der politischen Freiheit, die auch für die Bürger der arabischen Minderheit gilt, schafft Israel durch die zur Normalität gewordene Besatzung ein Apartheid-System neuen Typs, argumentiert der prominente Journalist von Haaretz. Das Bruno Kreisky Forum hat Gideon Levy nach Wien geladen. Tessa Szyszkowitz diskutiert mit ihm, wie die Besatzung die israelische Gesellschaft verändert. Boykottaufrufe gegen jüdische Siedlungen in der Westbank und die Israelpolitik der österreichischen Regierung Kurz sind Themen. Das Gespräch im Bruno Kreisky Forum fand am 16. Jänner 2020 in Wien statt, in englischer Sprache, wobei Gideon Levy auch wienerisches Deutsch nicht fremd ist.
Ich möchte so gerne Deutsch sprechen, aber ich habe es leider ganz verlernt. Als Kind habe ich nur Deutsch gesprochen, aber dann war ich erwachsen and I never knew how to say occupation in German. Because as a child, nobody spoke with me about the occupation. And then I realized I cannot lecture in German. But please, if you would like to ask questions in German, I'll be more than happy to revive my dead German. I'm always so happy to speak, especially with an Austrian accent. I feel even more so. I'm looking forward tomorrow to find a place with Peuschel, because my grandmother used to prepare us Peuschel. My brother is here today. We both love to eat Peuschel. So I'm very excited to be here tonight. It has also a special meaning for me to be in Bruno Kreisky's residence, in Bruno Kreisky Foundation. I had this privilege to meet him once when he was chancellor. I was different then, but many times I think, would he be alive? What would he think today about what's going on, and mainly about Israel, obviously? I think that he was really a pioneer, a courageous pioneer to see what many other statesmen didn't see. And in Israel, as you know, he was very much, not very much beloved, and they really incited against him in a very, mainly Golda Meir, our unforgettable prime minister, who once told us that after the Holocaust, the Jews have the right to do whatever they want. And in another time, she told us once that she will never forgive the Palestinians for forcing us to kill their children. So this Golda Meir also declared Bruno Kreisky as an enemy, as an anti-Semite, as a self-hating Jew, all those things that we know today. Many of us hear the same. So for me, it has a special meaning to be here tonight. And I'm really happy. And Tessa, I know for so many years, we will not tell anybody how many years we know and how do we know. So thank you very much for bringing me here. I guess that not everyone will agree with me tonight, and some will might be even angry at me, and this is fine. I come from a different point, that you are coming from a different position. I'm an Israeli. I was born in Israel. My father was a refugee. My mother was a refugee from Europe. I cover the occupation now for over 30 years, week after week. There's not a single week that I missed travel to the occupied territories. Unfortunately, in the last 13 years, I can't go to Gaza because Israel does not let any Israeli to Gaza. But I keep on going, obviously, to the West Bank. And it changed my opinions, yeah. One more thing I have to say about myself is that my views changed throughout the years. I was a very good boy, Tel Aviv. I worked with Shimon Peres, another rival of Bruno Kreisky. I think that what Kreisky thought about Shimon Peres is more or less what Shimon Peres thought about Kreisky. And I tend to agree more to Kreisky than to Shimon Peres, but that's another issue. But I changed my views throughout the years through facing what I faced, through watching the crimes, the injustice, week after week, year after year. And my views are today far from what they have been 10, 20, 30 years ago. And above all, it must be very clear that my views are, it will be an exaggeration to say that I represent a minority in Israel. That's an exaggeration. I think people who share my views can be all gathered in a public phone, in a phone box. And even then there will be still some place left. So this must be said. First of all, it must be very clear the Israeli society is not a victim of the occupation. The victim of the occupation is the Palestinian people, period. Let's not make the Israeli society as a victim of the occupation. It is not. But the occupation obviously did change and did shape Israeli society in many ways. But the biggest issue about the occupation is the denial of the occupation in Israeli society. And this is a new phenomenon. If you watch the last two campaigns we have now every 3 months elections, as you know, and soon it will be every 2 months until we'll get it maybe on a daily basis. But right now it's only every 3 months. The occupation is non-existing. It's off the table. Nobody speaks about it. And this is really an unbelievable phenomena. I don't know one society in the world which lives in such denial like the Israeli society. There is a huge elephant in the room and nobody speaks about it anymore. I remember the 70s. You are young, but I was already in the 70s. I was 20, in my 20s. And I remember every Friday night dinner was this discussion, what will we do with the occupied territories? And how will we call them? We didn't even know how to call them. Some said it's liberated, others say it's occupied. Finally, we say they are administrated. But the joke was that two Israelis share 3 views about the occupied territories. Today, 3 Israelis hardly have 1 view. It is off the table. Israelis couldn't care less about it, except obviously of the settlers and their supporters. Israelis are deep in their private lives, and they believe that if they will not talk about the elephant will not be in the room, but the elephant is there. And this elephant is not overseas. We are not dealing with a colonialist country that has some colonies, in Africa, hundreds and thousands of miles away. It's half an hour away from my home. It's half an hour away from all of us. And we know nothing about what's going on there, and we care nothing about what's going on there, and we are in deep denial. And the question which really bothers me for so many years, how can a people, and Israelis are not monsters. They are, some of them even very nice people with values, with morality. How can they live with such peace with so little moral doubts, when on their behalf, on a daily basis, this reality is taking place, half an hour away from their homes. And for this, the Israelis recruited few sets of values which help them to live so much in peace and care so little about what is being done on their behalf. And I will mention it in a very short way. The first value which almost all Israelis share, even none of them will admit it, is the deep belief that we are the chosen people. Some will take it from the religious point of view, others will take it from the secular point of view. But if you scratch under the skin of most of the Israelis, they really think that we know better, that we are different, that the international law applies to any country in the world, but not on Israel. We are a special case. That nobody can tell us what to do, because we are the chosen people. And the second value, which is also very deep-rooted in Israeli society, is the belief that not only we are the biggest victim in history, we are the only victim in history. And don't you dare to mention any other victim, because we are the victim. And this, again, enables us to feel easier with what we are doing. And then comes the third deep-rooted value, and I'll be careful in how I phrase it. The Palestinians are not exactly human beings like us. Scratch under the skin of every Israeli and you'll find it, leftists and right-wingers, you will find the belief that, how to say, we are not equal. We are not the same human beings. They don't care about their children. They don't care if their children are killed. Many times they send their children to be killed. They don't love their children. They don't love their families. They don't love life. They were born to kill. You feel it, you hear it, you see it. And therefore, the question of human rights is not relevant. It doesn't apply on them, because they are all terrorists, because they are all have only one thing in their mind. Each Palestinian wakes up every morning and has only one question in his mind. How will he kick the Jews to the ocean? How will he exterminate the Jewish people, or how will he kick them away from his land? Nothing but this. That's the perception. Every Palestinian is a suspected terrorist. And this, again, helps us to live in peace with the occupation, because if this is the case, so, we have to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, we want to live, we are facing this monster, we also demonize them in many ways, we don't realize any other aspect but the terror. That's the only way to define a Palestinian, by his support of terror, all of them. And this enables us to live in peace. Add to this the media, which is the biggest collaborator in Israel with the occupation, a very free media with no censorship almost, with very little governmental pressure, most of it, if not all of it, commercial, totally recruit to hide the occupation, to bias the reality there, only for commercial reasons, not to bother the readership, not to bother the viewers. They don't want to see what's going on there, so we will not show it to them. We will not tell them the story. We will tell them only what they want to hear. And they want to hear that the Palestinians are terrorists, the Palestinians were born to kill, the Palestinians are only enemies, bloodthirst, inhuman, and this is what we'll tell them. And the media is another factor which enables us Israelis to live in peace with the occupation. And finally, we must realize that after so many years in which the occupation was there as a contemporary phenomena, today it's about time to realize that it's not contemporary at all. It is not contemporary and not temporary. It is a permanent phenomena. I think that Israel never had any serious intention to put an end to it. And for sure today there is no intention to put an end to it. We are running now to the elections. Out of 120 members of parliament, 105 at least are supporting the continuance of the occupation. Let's face it. Except of the joint list, there is not one single party which stands against the occupation, which stands in favor of putting a total end to the occupation. So in this atmosphere, I'm afraid to say that it's very hard to expect any change from within Israel. As part of you know, life in Israel is wonderful. Economy is doing very well. It is so cheap for me to be in Vienna and it's so expensive for me to be in Tel Aviv because economy is really doing well. And there is no incentive to go for any solution. Why? What for? Life is so good. Brainwash is so efficient. Palestinians are weaker than ever, divided, lacking leadership, losing spirit of struggle. Except of some local struggles, they lost it, let's face it. The Arab world couldn't care less. Even the lip service of the past is not heard anymore. And above all, the West lost interest. The West lost interest in the Palestinian cause. We are honored today to have the Palestinian ambassador here, and I'm sure you know better than I. I mean, I really don't envy you. To be today a Palestinian ambassador in the West is a very impossible job, because the West lost interest. Even the lip service is gone. Very optimistic opening, huh?
Can we look at why this situation came about in Israel, that there's so little appetite now for political movements that advocate ending the occupation? For me, when I lived in Israel in the 90s, it was still, as you said before, very clear that people thought the occupation was not legitimate. I wonder if one of the reasons why this has changed is that from the outset, the Israeli society was, came about, born out of the Holocaust and collectively traumatized. And I wonder if there was even a chance that people could have not seen hostility as such a vital threat to the entire state that they had never a chance to really free themselves of it. I mean, do you have any understanding for the fact that people who see hostility as such a inescapable fate to their existence are very difficult peacemakers, because it's based on compromise and maybe also trust?
Yeah, but it should also motivate people to go for a solution, because if you are so scared and you know that you will not live forever on your sword, because no people in history lived only on its sword, even the biggest empires couldn't make it. So I could expect that the opposite will happen. If you are so traumatized, you have to look for a solution and not just believe that you will all your life live on your military force and do nothing to bring, because nobody has the illusion that this is a solution. But I think it goes backwards. We had a peace camp. And let's take the year of 82. There was a massacre in 2 Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, Sabra and Shatila. not being done by Israelis, but by the Christians, but Israel was involved by letting them do this horrible massacre. The next day, there were 400,000 Israelis in the main square of Tel Aviv. If today the same massacre will take place in the same circumstances, if there will be 40 people, it will be a great, great success. And that's the whole story. In between, we had an intifada. We had first an Israeli prime minister who went to make peace with Yasser Arafat in Camp David and came back and declared that there is no Palestinian partner. And people believed him. And then came the exploding buses and the suicide bombers. And the Israeli peace camp was totally smashed, which says something about how solid was he from the first place. But yeah, I was suspicious about it before, but still it exists, nothing left out of it. And the Israelis, for their own convenience, I guess, decided that there is no solution, and if there is no solution, let's put it aside and continue our lives. The only problem is that the Palestinians don't have this luxury, because their life is not the Israelis' life. And let me suggest that except of the ambassador and maybe some other Palestinians who are here, none of us, but really none of us, can imagine what does it mean to be a Palestinian under the Israeli occupation. None of us has the idea. On a daily basis, not in times of bloodshed and war and killings. No, the daily reality of being humiliated on a daily basis, of watching your parents being humiliated or watching your children being humiliated, living without any kind of dignity, without any kind of possibility to plan your day, because you never know if you make it or not, from school to home, from home to the hospital, from the hospital to your work, you never know. Going to sleep every night and not knowing if the army will not knock at your door, and usually they don't knock at your door, but they explode it and come in. It is a life that none of us can imagine, not to speak about Gaza, which is a cage with 2 million people who are taking place in the biggest experiment in human beings. Let's put 2 million people in a cage and let's see what happens to them for 13 years now. With young generation without no perspective for nothing. So this reality is taking place now 52 years. It doesn't show any signs that it's about to end or about to improve. On the contrary, 20 years ago, we were in much better situation than today. So the only solution that the Israelis found themselves to cope with it is just to put it aside. And the Israelis have the luxury to do it, to be able to do it, because their life is not affected by the occupation. Directly, for sure not. What? There are some soldiers who serve there, but it's not the majority of young Israelis. And all the rest, they are not there, and the media is not covering it. So, we live very well without finding a solution.
But it seems to me that also the Oslo process, which was taken pretty seriously on both sides, not only from the political leaderships, but also from people. I mean, there was real hope. Many people would maybe dispute that it ever had a real chance to succeed. But when in the beginning of the 90s, people really generally felt that there's an opening, and they extended also their hands to each other. And I think the breakdown throughout after Rabin's assassination, and then with Netanyahu first time becoming prime minister, and the terror that came into Israeli coffee shops and buses, destroyed this initial feeling of a beginning of, trust would be too much to say, but an opening, an emotional opening also to the other side. And I think this is one of the big reasons why people could never come back after this this violence that was such a, the backlash of the peace offering was so bad for both sides that on the Israeli side it genuinely finished off the very complicated leftish position to say, even if they try to kill us, we need to make peace, which is a difficult thing to do also.
First of all, Tessa, I'm not sure we have to do peace. We have to follow the international law before anything else. And following the international law should not be conditioned. We don't have to look for peace right now. We have to look for some kind of justice. Peace will come or will not come, I don't know. But above all, there is an international law. There is an international community which said its very clear word for decades now. International institutions. There is a clear, very clear view of the reality, of the lack of legitimacy of this occupation, of the crimes of war and crimes against humanity, which are happening on a daily basis, and I repeat it, on a daily basis. So I'm not sure that we can always judge Israel according to the Jewish complexes and the Israeli complexes and the Israeli fears and the Israeli traumas. There is also a Palestinian people with quite big traumas and quite big sufferings. Nobody speaks about them. There is an international law which should be applied, and say this word very clearly and very loudly. And the Israelis, they have fears, they have traumas, they should be sent for treatment. But before going to treatment, they should first of all follow the international law. Nothing but this.
So if you look at the international law and if you look at the Israeli society and its approach to law, one thing that happened in the last 30 years is that the tiny ultra-Orthodox community, which follows a different law than the state of Israel, has become a very sizable minority, which also, even when it was still very small, was sort of the kingmaker in the Israeli Knesset, deciding who could be prime minister. Is that one of the reasons why there is such an insecurity towards what is right or wrong? Because the law of the state, which functions pretty well in terms of the Supreme Court, which is a credible institution till today, and there's of course also open media, and you have judges and NGOs that check on Israeli government policies. But is one of the reasons that you have this claim, the biblical claim to Judea and Samaria, the idea that people are now ministers in the government who decide about education on a different approach than the original Israeli law, which was based on democratic principles in a Western way? Is this a reason why it has become so difficult to define what law should actually be?
No, I don't think so, because by the end of the day, the mainstream will decide. And the mainstream is sleeping. The mainstream is apathetic. The mainstream is indifferent. And the responsibility is on the mainstream, on the majority, not on the ultra-Orthodox, and even not on the settlers. They are doing what they can do. They try as hard as they can. They try to blackmail one government after the other in a very successful way. But finally, there's a government which let it happen. And the problem is really with the mainstream of the Israelis, not the right-wingers. And the problem of the mainstream is that they live in denial. They ignore the problem. They break away from any responsibility or accountability. For them, there is no occupation. You mentioned before the legitimacy of occupation in Israeli society. I have news for you, Tessa. For most of the Israelis, or for a bigger part of Israelis, there is a question if there is occupation at all. Because you don't occupy, you are not an occupier in your own land. And why is it our own land? Because God promised it to us in the Bible. So, with this to cope in rational terms is really helpless. And it serves all our desires, dreams, ambitions, everything, and it's fine with me. The only lacking point here is that there is another people there. And this people is totally absent from the discourse. Many times we deal with security. Have you ever heard a discourse which speaks about the security for the Palestinians? It's always security for Israel. A regional superpower with one of the strongest armies in the world, and the whole world stopped its breath only for the security of Israel. Excuse me, what about the security for the Palestinians? Don't they deserve some kind of security? But this is even not mentioned because they are absent. They don't exist. And for Israelis, it's very, very convenient to continue like this and to deal with minor problems and to break away from the main issue. And this is what happens, and this will happen, I'm afraid, for more time, as long as Israelis will continue to not be accountable for the occupation.
And is there a way now in this stalemate between Netanyahu and Benny Gantz on this centrist Kahol Levan party movement, that they could break through it because the other big minority, the Palestinian Israelis, might go more to the voting, to the election polls than they did before, because they went 49%, less than half in March 2019. It was 59% voter turnout in September 2019. So maybe by March we are up to 70%, and that might actually bring in more Knesset members for the joint Arab list, and then give at least a majority to Benny Gantz.
So first of all, if Benny Gantz will become prime minister, it will be good news for Israel, but it will not be good news for the Palestinians. Nothing will change. Benny Gantz, the difference between Benny Gantz and Netanyahu is in some kind of rhetorics. But when it comes to the core issues, Benny Gantz will maintain and continue the occupation exactly like Netanyahu, exactly like Shimon Peres, exactly like Yitzhak Rabin, exactly like all the Israeli prime minister. None of them had any kind of intention to put an end to it. So Benny Gantz will meet Abbas. There will be photo opportunities. There will be a new spirit in the air. The EU will hug Benny Gantz. He will be invited again and again, and Macron will say there is a new hope for the Middle East, and maybe Mr. Kurz will join him and say there is a new hope for the Middle East, and nothing will change, because Benny Gantz, exactly like Netanyahu, does not have any intention not only to put an end to the occupation, he even supports in annexating the Jordan Valley. He said so. So what do you ask for more? So it will be a new atmosphere, but nothing more than this. But you asked about the joint list. Unfortunately, two things must be said about them. First of all, they are much more concerned, the voters are much more concerned about their own struggle within Israel, about their own rights and their own, the way that they are treated and the way that they are discriminated in Israeli society. they care much less about the occupation, because Israel succeeded to make this division between, we have today 3, 4, 5 Palestinian peoples. We have the Israeli Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. We have the Jerusalemites who are not citizens but residents. We have the West Bankers. We have Gaza. We have the diaspora. And we succeeded quite to disconnect between all those communities, even physically. Gaza cannot come to the West Bank. The West Bank cannot come to Gaza. The diaspora cannot get to Gaza. The Israeli Palestinians cannot get to Gaza. It's very, very divided. And the Israeli Palestinians who are participating in the elections care now more about their own community and their own fate. And secondly, they are still excluded from the political game. Nobody speaks about them as joining the coalition, even though I guess that if someone would have offered it to them, they wouldn't exclude it. But they are not part of the political game. They might support guns from the outside, but they are not a real actor in Israeli politics, unfortunately so, and they have no influence on what will be Israel's policy.
But at least sort of they could help make a change, or you think it would be, you know, I understand that you think it's completely pointless to elect someone who is also not very much for any peace process, but
No, he's very much for peace process, Tessa. He's very much for peace process. I mean, the longest peace process will continue. Peace process, he's very much in favor, and there will be a peace process. Like we had now in the last 50 years, there will be another 50 years of peace process, and meetings, and plans, and all kinds of declarations. But at the same time, the settlements will be built, the occupation will continue, and nothing will change on the ground.
But you know, when Aluf Ben, who I met last week,
he told me.
He said, I hope he only said nice things about
Only nice things. How can someone say something not nice about you?
Thank you. But he explained to me what he meant by Netanyahu parameters, that sort of whoever it is, if it's Benny Gantz or Netanyahu himself, that all this establishment, the political leadership, just accepts the fact for themselves that you cannot solve the peace process because you have the conflict because you have no partner. You can only see that you strengthen Israel as it is, strengthen the economy, take a little bit of a hit to the outside with the international community because you don't change anything on the ground. You just keep up the status quo. And in the end, then try that way to avoid the civil war. And that's sort of what Netanyahu has done quite successfully, and that's why people still support him, although he's with like more than 1 foot already in prison. But I still always wonder why people, are so willing to go then for Benny Gantz as an alternative, where there's so little difference between them, and why there is not a movement of more leftist, more forcefully peace willing, enforcing young Israelis, because, everyone who we know is not only interested in making a new startup, but they would also really want to have a different future for their country.
First of all, the future of this country is quite promising also with the occupation. Why? What's wrong about the future of Israel? It's doing so well, and technology is doing so well, and science, and medicine, and economy, and military. I mean, future looks quite nice also with the occupation. And Benny Gantz is promising the Israelis a new atmosphere, obviously end of corruption, a clean man, a nice man, and I don't say it in a cynical way. Those are very important things. The only thing that we can't expect him is to do any major changes about the occupation. And without major changes, nothing will happen. You mentioned before Oslo, and we were all, almost drunk out of optimism in Oslo times. But when I look backwards, Oslo was also a trap. If Israel really was so serious about putting an end to the occupation in Oslo, why didn't they stop the settlements project? Why didn't they even discuss the settlements project? How can you claim that you want to put an end to the occupation and you build more settlements? I mean, how does it go hand to hand? At least stop building them. At least evacuate some of them. How come that the settlements were not an issue at all in Oslo and there is nothing concerning that's the real way to judge Oslo today. I was part of this orgy of happiness and optimism in Oslo years. Really, I really believed we knew each other then. I really believed in Oslo. But when I look backwards, I ask myself, why didn't we speak about the settlements? And that shows lack of seriousness, or at least lack of good intentions. And I want to say one more thing, because you spoke about the conflict and solving the conflict and having a partner and not having a partner. France did not have a partner in Algeria. And France put an end to the occupation in Algeria. And there was no Algerian-French conflict. There was a French occupation in Algeria which came to its end. With risks, with war, with bloodshed, it came to its end because it was injustice, because it was not legitimate, and because it had to come to its end. And I don't remember an Algerian partner who promised France that everything will be peaceful. No, there was a French courageous leader who decided to put an end to the occupation, period.
Well, Algeria was not such an existential threat to France ever.
I'm not sure that the Palestinians are such an existential threat. This is also an exaggeration. And it is a threat and it is a danger, but not existential, because Israel is strong enough. And I don't see that those existential dangers are being solved by us staying in the occupied territories. I know one thing. The biggest strategic achievement of Israel ever is the peace with Egypt. Now, when Israel, the most secure border of Israel is the border with Egypt. No one was killed there now for over 40 years. Nothing. A peaceful border. Not a big love between the two peoples, but security, much more than any missiles, is this treaty. Now, I remember when Sadat came over and everyone said, oh, it will be a piece of paper, we'll return all the territories. Moshe Dayan, the unforgettable Moshe Dayan, said that we'd rather have Sharm el-Sheikh without peace than peace without Sharm el-Sheikh. And today we don't have Sharm el-Sheikh, and security we have much more than before. Much more than before. So, also this demonizing the dangers and exaggerating the dangers. Look at reality. The only way to guarantee Israel's security is by being accepted to this part of the world. And as long as we do nothing about it, there will never be security for Israel also.
So what then you think is the reason why nobody pulled out the settlers in the 90s when there was a window of opportunity to at least start with the settlers in Hebron after the Goldstein massacre and these kind of things? What was it then? Is this an inherent problem of the Zionist project that it didn't work? Were people too weak as leaders? Was Rabin not really committed to it?
He was very committed, but unfortunately at this point he was not courageous enough. He was courageous until a certain point, but when it came to this night in which he could at least evacuate the settlers from Hebron after the massacre, he got cold feet, as we say, and in the last minute he didn't have the courage. It's all about courage. And this is what we lack more than anything else, a courageous leader. And to evacuate today is not relevant anymore because we are speaking about 700,000 settlers. Who will evacuate them? I mean, we should realize it, that this is a fait accompli. They will stay there. They won. And we have to start to think about the alternative. And without their evacuation, there is no solution. And nobody is going to evacuate 700,000 settlers or even 500,000 settlers without Jerusalem, 400,000 settlers. Who is going to evacuate them? So therefore, my suggestion is to start to change the discourse and to speak about equal rights and not settlements and not territories and not occupation. Only one simple thing, and maybe now you'll get me as a little bit more optimistic because I really feel bad. People came here to hear some kind of hope, and I, with my pessimism, don't leave much place to, but I think I'm very, very hopeful. Because once we realize that this is yesterday's game, that the train left the station, there is a reality in the occupied territories, in the West Bank. There is a reality of hundreds of thousands of Jews who live there, who have no intention to leave, and there is no government who can make them leave, and there will never be a government who will make hundreds of thousands of Jews leave. We have to realize that in this battle they won, and we have to go to the next step, because the most pessimistic thing we can do is to continue to speak about the two-state solution, evacuating the settlements, and know that nothing will happen. And once we'll change the discourse and we'll start to speak about this very basic thing, equal rights. What do we ask? Equal rights to all the people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, including Gaza, including the West Bank, including Jews and Muslims and Christians. Equal rights. Is it something so extraordinary? Is it something so astonishing to speak about equal rights? It's a basic of any democracy, isn't it? I mean, that's the way I learned democracy, that the basic principle of democracy is equal rights. So why not equal rights, for God's sake?
Absolutely. It's such a nice, just and peaceful
We have
idea.
to start it. I know you say it in a cynical way, and here I am not cynical. Because I think we should start. Because if we don't start, we get backwards. It's not that we stay in the same place. The more we don't open a new chapter, we will get more and more stuck in this present reality, which is unacceptable. I hope that everyone agrees at least that the present situation is unacceptable, that millions of people will suffer under this brutal tyranny of the Israeli occupation, and it is a brutal tyranny, one of the most brutal tyrannies in the world, let's face it, and I know what I'm talking about because I'm there. It is one of the most cruel, brutal tyrannies on earth, not less than this. We cannot accept it going on forever. And if we continue to speak, to use the discourse, yesterday's discourse, we doom them to continue to live under this reality forever. I think this at least should be unacceptable.
So how do we get there?
We start, we don't get there. You are young, you might get there, I will not get there. You don't get there, you start.
How?
By changing the discourse, by challenging Israel. Are you ready to give all the people under Israeli rule equal rights? Yes or no? If Israel says no, it declares itself officially and formally as an apartheid state. Because if you don't give equal rights to all the people who live under your rule, you are an apartheid state. If you do it according to an ethnical or national line, namely that Jews will get all the rights and those who live in the occupied territories are not Jews don't get any rights, this has no other name in the world but apartheid. And then, it's about the international community to decide Do you accept another apartheid state in 2020 or 2030, or you don't care about having an apartheid state in the Middle East?
But if you say apartheid state, you already have like 9 of 10 Israelis against you. And the,
much more than 9 out of 10.
11 out of 10.
Exactly.
And then you will have problems to even have this dialogue, I fear, within the society. If, it's a little bit like the debate that Corbyn and anti-Semitism had with each other, where Corbyn said, I'm a non-racist, and that's why anti-Semitism in the Labour Party does not exist. If you just deny talking about the reality, it's still there, of course, but if you have to approach it in a way so that people can understand and find constructive solutions or something. And it seems now, in Israel you are debating a nation law which puts Israeli Arabs in a situation to be second-class citizens quite clearly. So this is where we are. That's the status quo. We are not talking about how nice it will be to now put also a few million Palestinians from the occupied territories into the equation of being full Israeli citizens or citizens of an Israeli-Palestinian state. Yeah?
No, it will not. They will not be full Israeli citizens. It will not be Israel. It will be something else. We are not joining Palestinians to the Israeli state. We have to create something new. This is a long way to go. But I'm asking you, Tessa, what is the real alternative? Tell me what is the alternative. I'm happy to hear any kind of alternative. What is the alternative?
It's not that I have an alternative, because I share the same frustration that you share, and I think everyone else does. I mean, it's not that Israelis don't share this frustration, and Palestinians at the same way, because nobody wants a war to inflict on the other side seriously from all responsible places. So I don't know how we can get there. So is there a way, in a diplomatic way or a civil resistance, to push the Israeli government to entertain more of a just way of looking at civil rights for everyone?
Look, the Palestinians really tried everything. They tried military struggle, they tried terror, they tried diplomacy. When they try diplomacy, they call it diplomatic terror. When they try a boycott, they call it economical terror. When they try terror, it's obviously terror. They really tried everything. Nothing improved the situation. Nothing brought us closer to a solution. I'm really happy to hear any kind of solution. What I'm not ready to accept is to say nothing can be done and let's continue with our lives, because our lives are good. But in the same time, there are 5 million people, at least, who live in an unacceptable way, in an inhuman way. This cannot continue forever only because we are frustrated. Yeah, something must happen, and in history taught us that usually something is happening finally. But here we are facing a situation in which the solution not only gets not closer, it gets far and far. Because as you say, there is no status quo.
So what would you call the European Union, for example, to do?
To forget about the two-state solution, to stop with this empty, hollow lip service of talking about the two-state solution, knowing that it will never happen, and to draw the conclusions out of it. The EU knew very well what to do vis-à-vis South Africa. They were very efficient. They knew exactly what to do. If someone can come and convince me that a state in which one people has all the rights and the other people has no rights is not similar to South Africa, is not an apartheid state, I'll be more than happy to be convinced. But as I understand it, and as many South African freedom fighters understand it, I met the other day in London, a few months ago, the first grandson of Nelson Mandela, who went with him to all his trips as president, because he was also his beloved, he's a member of parliament now, Chief Mandela. People like him think that the Israeli apartheid is much worse than the South African apartheid. So I'm not going to comparison because there are many differences also. There are many differences. But by the end of the day, something basic is very clear. Between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there are today around 6.3 million Jews and 6.3 million Palestinians. The 6 million Jews are living in a liberal democracy with freedom, with all the human rights and civil rights you can imagine yourself. Part of the 6 million Palestinians are living under a tyranny. And it's not a temporary phenomena, it is there to stay like this. Can you define it any other way but as an apartheid? It walks like apartheid, it talks like apartheid, it is apartheid.
So if
you go to the West Bank, some of you have been there, and you see a settlement and next to it a Palestinian village. You go to the Jordan Valley, and you see the settlement with all the possible resources. And next to it, a Palestinian village, which is much older than the settlement, gets very little resources, but above all, get no rights whatsoever, not freedom of movement, not freedom of speech, not participating in the elections. We have in few weeks elections. One village will participate in them and the next village is not participating in those elections. Can you call it a democracy? I'm really asking seriously. Can it be defined a democracy when, imagine yourself in Austria, one village will participate in the elections and the next village will not participate. Will you call Austria a democracy? So as long as it was temporary and it was about to be solved, so you say, okay, it's an emergency time, it's a military occupation, and very soon it will end. But you know, after 52 years, nobody can take it seriously that there is any intention to put an end to it. And we have to draw the lesson.
So, for example, the European Union now, the European Court actually said now that settlement products from Israel should be labeled as such so that people can decide in Europe if they want to boycott settlement products or not. Is this the right way to go about it?
First of all, Israel learned long time ago that the EU is a paper tiger. You know, in the beginning, Israel was really concerned from any condemnation of the EU. And they were so careful not build certain settlements because the EU will condemn Israel. And then they saw, so there are condemnations, so what? Now you are reaching a very sensitive issue. And that's it's not only the boycott it's not only labeling products, but finally it should go boycotting or not. Now, first of all, marking products from the settlements, it's, again, I don't understand the question at all, not your question, obviously, but I don't understand why is it an issue? Are the settlements officially part of the sovereignty of sovereign Israel? No, even Israel doesn't claim so. So why can't it be mentioned? You mention every product, where is it made? And if the settlers are so proud about their project, why do they care that it will be mentioned that it's being made there? But more than this, you ask your products, when you buy something, you want to know where was it manufactured and what is in it. Maybe you want to know exactly the ingredients of each product you buy, don't you? Some of you would boycott any kind of products of the meat industry because you don't want to support this industry because of moral or health reasons. Some others will decide we don't want to support the sweatshops in Asia because of the conditions of the workers there, and we will not buy those products. And if I see that it's made in Vietnam, I don't buy it. Is there any problem in this moral judgment? Will you condemn someone who does not buy products from the sweatshops, or will not buy products of the meat industry? Will anyone condemn? And here, when it comes to Palestinians and settlements, not only it's an issue to mark those products, it is becoming a crime to ask for it. Looking for justice for the Palestinians is going now through a process of criminalization, not less than this. It's becoming, in many countries, it's a violation of the local law. And we can get into it even deeper if you ask me, but it's especially sensitive in Austria, and I know it, but we have to speak about it freely and honestly. There is anti-Semitism in Austria. There is anti-Semitism in Europe. There is anti-Semitism in the world, and it should be fought, no doubt about it. But not any criticism about Israel is anti-Semitic. And not any criticism about the occupation is anti-Semitic. And Israel created a new strategy a few years ago. Maybe one of the biggest success stories of Israeli strategies. Namely, to label any criticism in the world about Israel, about the occupation, about anything which concerns Israel as anti-Semitism. And it paralyzed Europe, and it's paralyzing part of the United States. It's effective, it's really a huge success story, but it creates some deep questions that you should face. Questions about freedom of expression, questions of freedom of public debate. Why? I mean, I don't support, or I do support, but why should I be condemned for supporting, struggling for putting an end to the occupation? Where did we get that finally those who are asking for justice are criminalized? And there are some anti-Semites among them, but not all of them. I would even say the majority are not anti-Semites, are people of conscience, and they have the right to raise their voice. Everywhere, even if some of them are anti-Semites, the others cannot afford themselves to be silenced only because part of them are anti-Semites. We have to make this separation, and it's very easy to make this separation and not identify any criticism as anti-Semitism, because this leads us to very bad places.
Well, it's also a question of to have concrete point of criticisms towards Israeli government policies is something that people should be free to do, of course. If people want to mix in anti-Semitic remarks, they should be criticized for that.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are certain criteria that we all know and that we can also point out, and we have to have this debate apparently because it seems so ideologically complicated to sort this out that we also can't ignore it. So we will have to deal with that. But there's an interesting...
I just want to, sorry to interrupt you. I think that if Bruno Kreisky, that we are all honoring him here tonight, if he would have been alive today, I'm not sure he could find a venue to speak about his opinions and views about Israel and the Middle East. I'm not sure that you would find a venue in Vienna to have a lecture today. I'm not sure. You know more about it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I would, for example, wonder if Bruno Kreisky would support a boycott movement of Israel. And I don't think that he would.
After so many years that he tried some other ways and they all failed?
Yeah, but what he actually tried to do at the time was super important and was the only thing one should do, which was to open a diplomatic channel between Israelis and Palestinians. And people wanted to shoot him for that, because they didn't understand that there are not two evils or one only good and the other one evil. So he did exactly the right thing. And I would trust Bruno Kreisky's intelligence also to have developed with this conflict and not have given completely up. And also, in Austria, in any case, the no platforming movement has just only begun. So if Bruno would be quick, he could still have a conversation about the Middle East before everything blows up around us.
I wish.
But interestingly, for example, the new Austrian government is a coalition of New Conservatives and Green Party. And they have in their coalition agreement a clear commitment to fight not only anti-Semitism, but also anti-Zionism. Now, this is something which I find quite interesting, because you could, of course, also argue that in the name of Zionism, a lot of racist policies is now being implemented, not only in the territories, but also in Israel itself, through things like the nation law and all these kind of things. So should that be in a coalition agreement, or is this misleading also that people now, if they criticize Israel itself, might get told that this is an anti-Zionist thing that the Austrian government would like to fight?
Look, Austria is not like any other European country, and I understand the sensitivity, and it should be there. And I wouldn't treat Austria like Sweden. Austria carries some kind of responsibility, and I understand the sensitivity of not getting back to those dark times. And rightly so. And I'm not Austrian, and I'm not here to tell you what to think and what to say and what to do. I just think that it is unacceptable to prevent any kind of criticism about Israel. Israel cannot have more immunity than it has, and it has already too much immunity. And it's impossible that Israel will be above any criticism only because there is anti-Semitism in the world. This is unacceptable in my view. And Israel cannot have a carte blanche to do whatever it wants only because of the past. The past should be respected and not be forgotten, obviously. But it cannot be a license for anything. No. And the right to criticize Israel, not the right, the duty to criticize Israel. I'll go even farther than this. If you have a relative who is a drug addict, you can do one of two things. You can supply him with money, and he will be very grateful, and he'll buy himself more drugs. And you can try to fight him and try to be tough on him, and obviously not supply him with money and not with sympathy and not with empathy. And then you will be considered as someone who cares about him much more. Israel is addicted to this occupation. Someone has to say it. And it might even be from a deep concern about Israel, not only a deep concern about the Palestinians, also from a deep concern about what is happening to Israel. And to shut up those mouths, to shut up those voices on behalf of fighting anti-Semitism is, for me, a cynical manipulation of Israeli propaganda, not less than this.
Das war der israelische Journalist Gideon Levy in einem Gespräch mit Tessa Szyszkowitz am 16. Jänner 2020 in Wien. Für das Audiofile bedanke ich mich sehr herzlich bei den Veranstaltern, dem Bruno Kreisky Forum für internationalen Dialog. Ich verabschiede mich von allen, die uns auf UKW zuhören, im Freirad Tirol und auf Radio Agora in Kärnten. Internationale Reportagen finden sich jede Woche im Falter. Wenn Sie gut informiert bleiben wollen mit Analysen zu Außenpolitik, Innenpolitik und Kultur, dann ist ein Abonnement des Falter der beste Weg. Ein Falter-Abo können Sie auch im Internet bestellen, über die Internetadresse abo.falter.at. Ursula Winterauer hat die Signation gestaltet, Anna Goldenberg betreut die Technik. Ich verabschiede mich, Bis zur nächsten Folge.
Sie hörten das Falterradio, den Podcast mit Raimund Löw.